Hello folks, once again welcome to Grybot Gaming. I am going to be dropping Lonely Lodge today. It looks like I might have one other person here with me. Hopefully we can dispatch them and I can have a conversation with you. The topic of today will be the CM Punk fight at the last UFC event. So, I guess similar to my hockey talk, if you are not an MMA fan, this may be a little boring to you. But if you are interested, or maybe even just if you're interested in any kind of combat sports at all, whether you're a martial artist or you are, a wrestler or somebody who has some experience in combat sports, you may find this a topic that you might be interested in. So at the last UFC event, CM Punk was one of the headliners, I guess, for the last UFC. He's not a professional mixed martial artist. He actually has no martial arts background at all, which is kind of interesting. I'm going to try to find this guy first. I'm going to see if I can sneak up to the window. He probably won't see that coming. He's contemplating. That was weird. So, anyway, as I was saying, CM Punk was put on the main card of this UFC event. And there was a lot of hype about how he's been training with one of the best trainers, and he had one fight already. It was over very quickly. He fought actually a really good fighter named Mickey Gall, who absolutely just decimated him, just wiped the floor with him. But everyone kind of chalked it up to, it's his first kick at the can. He's not really a professional fighter, so you can't really expect too much from him. I don't know, I guess valid excuses. That's really what they are. But valid nonetheless. It's your first fight, so you can't be expected to do too much, especially against somebody who, from, most of what I heard, was a pretty well-recognized fighter. So effectively the UFC went back to the drawing board, and I guess I should give you some background just in case you don't know who CM Punk is. He is a pro wrestler with WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, I believe it's called now. Back in my day, it was called the WWF. That's changed a while ago. So he never actually had any athletic pedigree. There's been cases where people who were professional athletes, like former wrestlers or former football players, also seem to do okay. Were able to perform in the UFC at a pretty high level because they're high-level athletes. But really, CM Punk's only claim to fame is the fact that he's a world-class entertainer, which doesn't necessarily make you a world-class fighter. It's really stupid crap. Speaking of stupid, I took out all my shields for nothing. Oh well, at least I have these two big pots. So anyway, not a world-class athlete, not a mixed martial arts fighter, but they thought, and I kind of get it from the UFC's perspective, they thought, well, we have this big name, we know he's going to draw people out, and why don't we just leverage that to, get more pay-per-views or get more butts in seats? So I can kind of see it from the UFC's perspective, and I guess I can see it from CM Punk's perspective, because apparently he thought he was capable of handling this, but he quickly proved that he was not capable. So the guy he fought was this guy named Mike Johnson. Never really heard of him before. Effectively, all the buzz I heard was that he was kind of a nobody. His record was like 0-1, which, I mean, you're a professional fighter, so I guess that still means you're a pretty tough SOB, but that's not exactly the record that you expect somebody in the UFC to have. Let's switch to the tack here and head down to the basement. So he didn't really have the pedigree of a competitive fighter, but fortunately for him, he had an opponent this time around that really wasn't as much of a threat as the people he fought in the past. However, the actual fight itself was a travesty of mixed martial arts, I think would probably be putting it mildly. It was somebody who was clearly fighting at an amateur level, and even an amateur level is somewhat generous. I have actually fought in the ring myself before as a kickboxer. It is a very ballsy thing to do. It's tough to actually put yourself out there and take a chance that you're going to get severely hurt. I did not win my kickboxing fight, but I gave it a college try, lost in a decision. So, but having a background in amateur martial arts, I can say that CM Punk does not measure up to an amateur level. The level that I fought at, I would say, was still probably higher than CM Punk. And again, he's fighting on the biggest stage there is for mixed martial arts, being the UFC. So the fight was CM Punk throwing incredibly sloppy techniques. Things that really should just be parried and countered with a smack to the head and game over. But for whatever reason, this Michael Johnson individual decided he would toy with CM Punk, so he was really not trying hard. He was basically letting him away with a lot of stuff that he probably should not have. And as a result, it ended up going to a judge's decision. There was one point in the fight where CM Punk was so out of his element, just outclassed, that he attempted to do something called pulling guard, which is generally where you try to effectively outmaneuver an opponent using jiu-jitsu. So you pull them down to the ground in the hopes that you're better on the ground than they are, which would be fine if that was the case. But in CM Punk's case, he was not better on the ground than Mike Johnson. He wasn't better on his feet either, but for whatever reason, he tried to pull guard, which, I mean, is fine if you think you can perform better on the ground than on your feet. By all means, pull the fight to the ground. However, if you're going to do it, you at least need to do that correctly, and he didn't even do that. So the idea of pulling someone to the ground, and he was trying to do a guillotine, which I guess if you want you can look up what that looks like, but you're effectively trapping somebody in a choke as you pull them down to you, which is good if you actually pull them down to you. And he couldn't even get that right. He kind of jumped up and hooked the guy's head as though he was going to go for a guillotine, except he jumped into his arms, and it ended up in this super awkward position where it almost looked like Michael Johnson was cradling CM Punk like a baby. It was bad, and from that point, Michael Johnson should have shrugged him off, dropped him on the ground, and beat the living snot out of him, because his guard for the like the way he was holding on to the guillotine was very easily countered. He could have simply shrugged him off. However, he did not. He proceeded to go to the ground with him and kind of roll around a bit. No, nobody really did much on either side. It was just really pathetic. And I think a lot of the complaints about the fight wasn't so much that CM Punk didn't meet the requirement of being a UFC fighter, because he doesn't have a fighting background. It's the fact that this Mike Johnson guy also didn't do the bare minimum that you would expect from any fighter to finish the match. So everyone was like, he just should have dusted that guy. Like, why was CM Punk even still hanging in there? He should have ended the fight quickly. It was an embarrassment to pretty much the whole UFC for Mike Johnson to even still be hanging around in the ring with somebody who was that untalented. Anyway, the fight itself was an absolute disgrace, and hopefully they won't do this type of thing again. They'll effectively letting somebody's notoriety be enough to excuse them from having to pay their dues and make it to the highest levels of a sport. It's like you don't drop a high school basketball player into the NBA. You shouldn't drop a pre-amateur fighter into the UFC. Fortunately, the card wasn't all awful. The fight between Colby Covington and Rafael Dos Anjos was actually quite good. Surprised me a bit because Colby Covington is one of those fighters who he runs his mouth a lot, which I don't know. I'm always kind of suspect when I hear a guy talk too much because you always wonder, is he all talk or does he actually have some legit cred? If a guy just goes out there and wins fights and he doesn't really say too much, you can be like, yeah, that guy's legit. But when a guy like talks a whole bunch about how great he is and how much better he is than everyone else, I kind of go into that knee-jerk reaction of he's probably just full of crap. So Colby talks more smack than anybody. I would say he's up there with Conor McGregor for smack talking. He could give a course in how to talk smack. And that fight actually was quite good. Colby Covington showed that he is no joke. He's a guy with a wrestling background, but man, he was constantly coming forward. He was constantly throwing punches, and the assumption was always that maybe Colby Covington could out-wrestle Dos Anjos, but when it came to striking, there'd be like no chance that he would be able to win the fight. But he basically beat him everywhere, so it just kind of goes to show that this dude is not he's not just a wrestler. He's not a one-trick pony. He is a legitimate contender. So it'll be interesting. He's been calling out other people too, like George St. Pierre and folks like that. So he seems to be the real deal, as it were, which is it's always interesting to have another fighter who's out there and is competitive, especially when they're talking smack and backing it up. So that was interesting, and now I don't know actually too much about what I'm interested in with the UFC fights moving forward. I guess all the talk now is between Conor McGregor and I'm going to try to pronounce this guy's name, Nurmagomedov, who's the guy from Dagestan, who's this like crazy good wrestler, against Conor McGregor, who's obviously a very, very accomplished striker. And then there was that whole thing with the even if you're not a UFC fan, you know about the incident with the bus where Conor McGregor was trying to throw a dolly through the oh, this guy's charging me, I think. All right, pop your head up. And I'm down. Anyway, that's my UFC chat for the day. Thanks for tuning in.